Well, it's one of those kind of nostalgic videos today because I'm going to be talking about my experience with the iPhone XS Max after a year. It's probably not exactly a year, the dates are a little bit different, but basically, about 12 months ago, I unboxed this XS Max, I put my SIM into it, and you guys know I wasn't using it the entire time, right? There were a few weeks in there where I switched to the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL, I switched to the One Plus, I switched to the Galaxy S10, I switched to the iPhone XR, you know, my SIM kind of hops between lots of different phones to review. However, the phone that my SIM was in for the majority of the past 12 months was easily and most comfortably the XS Max, which we joke about how terrible the 11 Pro Max name is, but is this really much better? Naming aside, today I'll be going into the details as to why this is the best smartphone I have ever used. So, like lots of people said last year, the XS was of course an S upgrade. It was not a substantial difference over the regular iPhone X that shocked the world with the most upgraded iPhone we had ever seen back in 2017. But despite what a lot of people who may love the iPhone SE form factor or feel more comfortable with the 5.8-inch OLED displays out there, I do definitely think size matters, particularly when it comes to people with big hands like me. I'm around 6 foot tall, and having a smartphone display that can fit comfortably in my larger sized hands was kind of important. The greatest upgrade I experienced when switching to the XS Max from the previous generation iPhone X was that larger size keyboard, because as cool and as revolutionary as that first iPhone X was, it was width-wise a lot more similar to a smaller iPhone 8 or 6 or 7 than it was a plus-sized iPhone, which I was more used to, because I'm in the favor of getting the biggest display possible as long as it can comfortably fit in my pocket. Which, by the way, I could still go more here. I would take a larger phone than the XS Max if it meant I got a larger screen, which it sounds like maybe in 2020 we might get. But the XS Max really did make a substantial difference to me because I finally got that full-size keyboard back, especially when I was watching videos in landscape. It felt like the content was actually filling up more space than it did on the iPhone X, because while we had these taller aspect ratios, the XS Max actually filled videos to their width that I was accustomed to with previous generation Plus model phones that I like. So yeah, if you just ignore the XS Max and just compare the 10 to the XS, a lot of people will say they're practically the same. You know, the A12 chip is a little bit faster, the speakers got a little louder, some improved water resistance. Of course, there was that new gold color and some smart HDR, plus a little bit better front-facing camera. But to me, I was far more interested in the XS Max because of getting the largest display ever on a phone. So much, in fact, that Apple said we can't call it Plus, we gotta call it Max, which I think ultimately resulted in the best possible experience you can get out of a smartphone. Because as comfortable and nice as the XS is, you usually had to take that with the compromise of battery life. The XS Max was kind of a happy medium to me because it was closer in that excellent battery life we got with the iPhone XR. However, still being a bit substantially better battery life than the XS offered, because while I did review the XS Max battery case, it honestly didn't help the battery life that much, and I can still get through most of the day with the battery that's packing on the XS Max. Though, full disclosure, I don't want to exaggerate things here, I work from home, and a lot of my job involves me sitting at a desk, and at this desk I have multiple Qi chargers. So I think my use case of the iPhone is not probably the same as the rest of you guys who may be going to school or going to work in places where you can't charge your phone while you're working. And there have been days when I'm out and about, I'm running errands, and I run into the dilemma of there's not a charger that is nearby for my iPhone to charge on. And in those circumstances, I can see the battery life drop, like a lot of people have commented on their XS Max needing to charge by midday, and it's just not cutting it for their daily usage, which I completely understand because, you know, I'm kind of the oddball out that always has a charger around, and I just kind of default set it down on the charger when I'm not using it. So while my XS Max has very rarely gone down below 20%, on those days where I'm away from the office, I can completely see why people aren't so happy with the XS Max battery. So hopefully the new battery life king iPhone, the Pro Max, is able to fix that in a couple days when I'll be getting it. So yeah, we can compare screen on times later, but battery life for me has been good. It's not the greatest in an iPhone, of course, but Apple never claimed it to be. While a lot of people may think of the design of the XS Max to be classic or old-fashioned, I love it the most because the notch is the same size as it was before, but now that there's more screen real estate, the screen-to-body ratio still kind of goes up. So I get it, the notch hasn't changed at all, but at the same time, it feels like it's taking up less space on the display because your display size you're working with is a lot more than it was before. Now, this doesn't really add any functional differences because you still can't add, you know, the battery percentage in the corner or anything. Maybe when they do shrink shrink the notch someday. That'll be like the one feature we all get excited for. But honestly, the great thing about it is it just feels up and out of the way. And after using phones with notches for a long time, this one doesn't bother me at all. And honestly, I feel like even if Apple did shrink it, it probably wouldn't make that noticeable of a difference. You would still use your phone the same way. iOS gestures have just been so solid from the beginning. When they started in 2017, they feel so fluid and natural that anytime I move back to an older iPhone with a home button, it just kind of feels out of place now. It just kind of feels like, hey, this isn't the way I'm supposed to use my phone. And I do feel like Face ID has improved a lot as well since the first day I bought this. There's been more and more situations where I'll even just have my iPhone laying flat on a table and I'll just kind of lean forward and look at it, and it will unlock even from fairly far away angles. And I feel like there were times in the early days with the 2017 iPhone X that it easily would have not been able to unlock in certain circumstances, and I do notice the Face ID speed improvement from iOS 13 as well. This has been another one of those classic years where you buy your new iPhone, it has the new experience, which for me was the new screen size. That silver stainless steel was new to me at the time, and I fell in love with the iPhone all over again because I had all of these screen benefits that I didn't have before, with the wider keyboard and videos filling up more space and the better battery life and all that. And you get used to it, you get comfortable with it, and then a new iOS version drops and it feels like you're using a brand new phone from the start. I've never really got that feeling from using Android phones, even extensively, and I've seen different versions of Android in the past that are fairly substantial, but none of them really quite feel as big a deal as iOS upgrades launching. Maybe because iOS comes out for, all the compatible phones at about the same time, and Android doesn't really have that, and all the changes brought to iOS are very, very noticeable usually. Maybe because iOS is more restrictive in customization, and there's not a bunch of companies that are doing all their own Android skins, so in a way that makes the iOS updates more substantial, because once I got iOS 13, the developer beta, on my XS Max, between dark mode, between the volume indicator finally being moved, and even just tiny UI changes they made throughout the entire operating system, it felt like I had a brand new phone, even though I had had this phone for such a long time in the first place. And that's where I think a lot of people stick with Apple for. They may not have the best looking hardware or even the most features or the best tech specs, but those software updates and that longevity you get when you buy an iPhone is, I think, what people like about it. They know every single year they're going to get some type of substantial OS improvement that's going to be noticeable and add things that they were looking for. So having used the Galaxy S10 and having used the OnePlus 7 Pro with all their great hardware features, and as solid as those phones were, I still found myself missing the XS Max, because while Apple may not have the highest screen to body ratio, it is the most uniform one. They got that same size bezel all the way around with those perfectly curved corners. Face ID works like a charm. I know there's other phones out there that have multiple forms of biometrics, but none of them have worked as reliably and consistently for me as Face ID has. Getting faster, of course, with that software update, and it feels like over time it's able to work from further and further angles away. I don't even know if that's possible, but definitely in more recent months, I feel like that unlock mechanism is just going by even quicker and quicker. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to smartphones that I've tested throughout the year, obviously this one was the default, partly because I love vlogging with it. If you don't know, I vlog a lot over on my Talks channel, and this has been an astounding camera for that performance. Most people agree iPhones have the best video performance out of any smartphone out there, and this has worked wonders for me. Between the microphone audio being excellent, 4K at 60 for as long as I want to. I filmed several vlogs in the 15-20 minute realm that are just 4K 60 all the way through, and nothing's more convenient than being able to airdrop it to my iMac Pro and just start editing it right away. And it feels like with more recent iOS updates, they've improved the speed of airdrop. There were times last year where airdrop would be like sluggishly slow, and it would annoy me to the point that I would almost want to just plug the iPhone directly in and import it that way, but I never got to that point because I'm in the portless challenge. In fact, I've only charged this phone inductively with Qi chargers, and I'm happy to say that that really hadn't affected my battery health until just recently. My battery health has been 100% the entire year until exactly last night. I decided to check my battery health, and it just now dropped down to 97%, which was kind of like a big bummer for me because I was just about to do this video of reviewing the XS Max after a year. I thought that would have been perfect to say, like, after a year of inductive charging, I finally got 100% battery health, but no, it's dropped slightly. But most people I've talked to who have had their phones for about a year, their battery health typically drops. And a lot of it has to do with how often you let your phone die and how often you keep it at 100%. So it's not all dependent on slow chargers, fast chargers, or Qi charging. That does play a factor, but it's not everything. Either way though, the simplicity of using it as my camera and taking it on trips and having the battery last me as long as I typically need it to, though I would definitely take more, yes please Apple. Face ID improving with time, the user experience improving with time, and this is highly a personal preference thing, but I've never held a phone that felt more comfortable than the XS Max. There's people out there that want like more boxy iPhones, or they want to return to the iPhone 5 days, but honestly, I think especially with gestures, when you're swiping up from the bottom of the phone all the time, it makes way more sense to have curved corners all the way around. Stainless steel just has kind of this smooth, aesthetically pleasing look to me that I've grown very, very comfortable with, to the point that any other phone I've tried out there, even ones with curved edges, just feel a little bit sharper. I feel like Apple gets that merging of the glass with the steel just right, to the point that it's not sharp, it doesn't cut into your hand when you're holding it. And while there's definitely design changes I would ask them to make in the future, like maybe switch to USB-C, or maybe work on lowering that camera bump, overall, I can't describe a phone that's felt more comfortable in my hand than the iPhone has. It just feels at home when it's in my palm. In regards to durability, I have actually dropped it a few times, but I've never cracked the glass. As you notice, it's still in pretty good shape, but if you look really, really hard with a magnifying glass, you will eventually find little scuffs on the stainless steel. But it's never been for me just using my phone and then just happening to drop it. It usually happens when it's in my pocket and then I sit down on a weird chair, or I lay down on a couch and then it slides out of my pocket and onto a tile floor. I think that's happened 2 or 3 times since I got it, and no glass cracking or anything like that. The glass does scratch a little bit, but I can only see it under certain lighting. That's kind of the sacrifice I pay when I don't put a screen protector on my phone, because I don't like the way they feel. But honestly, I don't notice the scratches on the display unless I'm like right in direct sunlight and I hold it directly up to the sunlight. So 90% of the time I'm using my phone, I don't see the scratches, but if you get close enough, they're there. So I knew that would affect my resale value if I wanted to sell this later, which is why I'm just trading it into Apple, because I don't want to deal with finding a buyer that's okay with that kind of thing. So I know I could probably find someone willing to pay a little bit more than Apple is, but I'm just doing the trade-in for the simplicity. And don't worry, I'm still going to be able to compare this to the Pro Max when I get it on Friday, so we can see like what kind of noticeable differences there are between the glossy back and the matte back. But overall, durability has held up well, especially given it's fallen onto tiles several times. I'm very glad the glass hasn't broken. Sadly, there's a lot of people out there that can't say the same thing. Camera quality has been excellent. I definitely think the telephoto lens is underrated. I understand why people want the ultra-wide lens on more phones, but still, I've got some pretty awesome shots with the telephoto lens that whenever I switched to the XR, I kind of missed having it around. The color accuracy and the crispiness of the display has been excellent for my liking. There's been other displays I've tested in the past that are also good, but in my opinion, this is still more than enough for what the average person needs. And as most of you know, the main reason I stick with Apple and I stick with the iPhone isn't necessarily because the hardware is great, though it is. It's mostly because of that ecosystem support. So you knew there was no way I couldn't bring that up, right? iOS and the software updates I've received and the AirDrop support between the Mac and how it's worked with my Series 4 has just made it an absolute delight to use, and I'm glad that in the past few months I didn't have to switch to some other Android to review. I just got to focus on the XS Max because now it's iPhone 11 time, so we gotta switch up again. And depending on how you look at it, good news, bad news, the iPhone 11 Pro Max is not gonna be terribly different from using this phone, which is fine, because if I wasn't a YouTuber, I could easily keep using this for another year. There's not some Android out there that makes me jealous and I want to go switch to it. The only reason I'm switching to the 11 Pro Max is because I know I want to review it for the channel, and I do a lot of vlogging, so the ultra-wide's going to be helpful for those situations, and of course it's my job to review that sort of stuff. So that's why I'm upgrading, but there's absolutely nothing critically wrong with the XS Max, nothing inherently wrong with it, and I think all of you XS Max users out there, do not feel inclined to upgrade. This is not a year you absolutely have to. Of course, if you want to, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but if you're on the fence about it, I think most of your XS Maxes have probably held up absolutely fine. And I'll never forget what we used to call it before it came out, the iPhone tennis match, because that sounded close enough, and now Apple's not selling anymore, so it's kind of end of the line for the XS Max, though at Apple retail stores, I think they are actually still selling them, but for $100 cheaper, so I guess that's not better because it still sucks. There's people buying brand new versions of these when the new iPhones are dropping like in a couple days, but there was a little bit of a discount, so sort of good move on you, Apple. But oh, and also, how could I forget the last large major iPhone flagship to ship with 3D Touch? No more 3D Touch after this guy. So started with the 6S, but it dies here. All haptic touch from here on out, so I'll get used to it. I've had 3D Touch off on my XS Max for a long time just to adapt, but without surprise, Apple Sheep is happy with the XS Max. I I am incredibly grateful that Apple decided to go bigger with these smartphones, fit our larger hands for the people who need that. Face ID has been awesome. iOS 13 has been a delight to use, even on the beta, and I can't wait to experience where Apple is going to take the iPhone next. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you guys in the next one.